I'm Mary Susan and this is Baking It Beautiful. Yesterday we fed our potato flake sourdough starter. This has been sitting out all night on my counter, and as you can see here, there are air bubbles, there's separation. We've got this big, thick, foamy part of potato flakes. This starter is ready to make bread, and I could not be more excited to have fresh bread in my house today. I want to show you up close how this starter looks. If you look super close, you can see all these air pockets that were created. You can see the separation. Here is a giant air pocket. You can see the separation from the potato flakes to the liquid. This is a good starter. This is ready to use. To make the potato flake sourdough bread, you only need a few ingredients. You of course need your potato flake sourdough starter, warm water, vegetable oil or canola oil will work, sugar, yeast, salt, and bread flour. Please make sure you are using bread flour. If you are using all-purpose flour, your bread will not rise very well. What we want to do first is we want to give our starter a really good stir, because we don't want all of that potato flake in the bread. We want it to be a really good mixture of all the starter. It is bubbling. I can hear it. It's kind of like a snap, crackle, pop Rice Krispie moment that you can just hear it. I love it. That means it is ready to go. So we are going to add in 1 cup of our stirred, already fed starter that has been fed 12 hours ago. Put that in my large mixing bowl. Then I'm going to add 1.5 cups of warm tap water. I'm never too concerned about the temperature of my water. My tap doesn't get super hot, and I find that it doesn't make a huge difference if it's super hot or warm. 1/2 cup of vegetable oil. You of course can use canola oil if you'd like. 3/4 cup of granulated sugar. This may seem like a lot of sugar, but this is actually going to make 4 loaves of bread. So per loaf, that's only a few tablespoons. And then I'm going to add in 1 tablespoon of instant yeast. You're probably thinking, but this is sourdough, why are you adding yeast? I have discovered that when I add yeast, my bread always turns out. Potato flake sourdough can be a little temperamental, especially with temperatures. So I prefer to have my bread turn out every time and be consistent, and the yeast does that for me. If you do not want to use yeast in your bread, you do not have to. However, it will take probably 12 hours on the first rise and another 12 hours on the second rise for your bread to completely rise and be ready to bake. I'm just gonna give these ingredients a little stir. And what I like to do is I like to leave this for about 5 minutes to sit for the yeast to get active and foamy. Of course, it is instant yeast. You don't have to do that, but I find that it always rises quicker if I give it that 5 minutes of time to rest. Okay, it has been about 5 minutes. If you can see this, my yeast is all bubbly and ready. So let's add our last 2 ingredients. This may not seem that important to you, but I promise you, if you leave out this tablespoon of salt, your bread will taste terrible. It tastes absolutely terrible. I have done it before on accident, and it's just a total waste. Make sure you add in that tablespoon of salt. You will not regret it. Next up, we're gonna add in, I'm gonna start with about 6 cups of bread flour. Now this will differ depending on what type of climate you live in. I have lived in a couple different climates. I currently live in Portugal, and it is very humid. So I have to use a little bit more flour to reach the consistency that I want. Before living in Portugal, however, we lived in Utah, which is a very dry climate, and I wouldn't have to use as much flour as I do here. One thing that I love about this bread is you don't have to knead it for 5, 10, 15 minutes. It really just comes together so fast. In fact, one of the questions I get a lot is, you don't have to knead it? no, you don't. They think I've left off a direction, but I haven't. As you can see, this is still extremely wet and sticky, and that is not the texture we are going for. So I'm gonna add in about another cup of flour. So this is now up to 7 cups. I'm gonna mix that in as much as I can with this spatula, and then I'll mix a little bit with my hands. It is starting to pull away from the bowl, starting to form a little bit of a ball. And this is the point where I like to ditch this and use my hands a little bit. And you can see it's sticky. It's still pretty sticky. I'm gonna sprinkle on about 1/4 cup. So I don't want it sticking to my hands so much. Roll up the sleeves. And then this is just the only amount of kneading I'm doing. And I wouldn't even classify this as kneading. I am still mixing in the flour. It's not sticking to my hands. It pulls a little bit, and it's not sticking to the sides of the bowl. I'm gonna dump this on the counter so you can see it. I typically don't do this. I typically just mix it all in the bowl. But I want you to be able to see the texture that I'm going for. It is slightly tacky. Maybe that's the word we want. Slightly tacky. But as you can see, it kind of holds its shape a little bit. I think it needs just a little bit more flour. Another couple tablespoons or so. Okay, and here we go. This is about where I stop. As you can see, the top still has some flour. It's not completely mixed in, and that's fine because we're gonna let it rise in our bowl. I'm gonna grease this bowl just a little bit and put my dough back in here and cover it. I'm just gonna add in just a very little bit, a teaspoon maybe, of oil. And I'm doing this because I don't want my dough to stick to my bowl when I'm done letting it rise. So here we go. I'm just gonna place it in here. This is what it looks like. I'm gonna cover it with a towel, and then I'm gonna actually stick it in my oven because it is a cold, rainy day here today, and I don't think it's quite warm enough in my house for it to just rise on the counter. If it were a warm summer day, I would absolutely leave it out on my counter. It would be plenty warm in my home. However, it needs a warm space to rise, and so I like to turn on my oven at the lowest temp, get it warm for about 3 minutes, turn it off, and stick my dough in there to rise. It is just a warm environment and really helps it grow and rise faster. You could also leave the lights on in the oven. That is also another tip, another trick you can use. And you can also use your microwave as a good spot if your oven is occupied. The sourdough bread will take about 3 to 4 hours to rise, and then we'll shape it into loaves. See you soon.